Tonight's story is about the Mary Celeste, a merchant vessel under sail, and the long calm drift by which one ordinary ship entered maritime memory. Not a haunted ship, not a tale of terror at sea, only canvas, barrels, charts, Atlantic weather, a tidy deck, and the quiet way newspapers can enlarge a practical event. The Mary Celeste was a brigantine, a working ship built for cargo and passage, not for legend. That is where the gentler version of the story begins, with wood and rope, with a hull that moved because wind filled sails, and sailors knew how to read sea and sky. Merchant shipping in the 19th century was repetitive labor across long water. Cargo loaded, papers checked, course set, watches kept, meals taken in cramped spaces, then days of sea, where the world narrows to deck, mast, horizon and weather, deck underfoot, rigging above, water on every side. The calm truth of ships is that most of their life is routine. In 1872, the Mary Celeste sailed with cargo that included industrial alcohol in barrels. The ship departed on a commercial voyage, part of the steady traffic that linked ports across the Atlantic world. There is something restful about remembering that a ship like this belonged to trade before it belonged to story. Ledgers mattered, seaworthiness mattered, provisions mattered. The crew would have lived by watch schedule and maintenance, coil rope, trim sail, check stores, mark position, sleep in turn, watch changes, lantern light below deck, a mug on a table that moves slightly with the sea. These are the textures that return the vessel to ordinary time. When the ship was later encountered adrift, what drew notice was not spectacle but contrast. A seaworthy looking vessel, sails present, cargo aboard. Yet no ordinary crew activity, no voices, no figure at the rail. The Dea Gratia, another ship, came across her in the Atlantic and sent men to inspect. That scene is best imagined quietly, one ship approaching another in open water, careful distance first, observing the set of sail, the condition of deck, the motion of hull and swell. Approach slowly, observe first. Sea has room for caution. Boarding an unattended vessel is, in its calmest form, simply maritime practicality. Men step across from one ship to another and begin noticing rigging condition, water in the hold, personal effects, papers, cargo, lifeboat absent. What later generations most often remember is the absence of the captain, crew, and family members aboard, but the sleep-safe approach emphasizes the presence of everything else. The ship itself was there. The cargo was there. The tools of navigation were mostly there or partly there. The lived-in quality of the vessel remained. Presence matters more than absence. Table, bunk, cupboard, sailcloth. A vessel carries traces of life even when no one is standing on deck. This is part of why the Mary Celeste story became so durable. The ship did not sink from view. It remained visible, almost domestic in its details. That made later retelling easy, yet Bedtime is better served by holding the practical frame. A merchant vessel under reduced but navigable condition, a boarding party making notes, a towing decision, an inquiry later in Gibraltar. Step by step, the event belongs to shipping procedure, insurance questions, and maritime administration far more than to any later mythology. Procedure calms the story. Inspect, record, tow, report. The Atlantic itself helps keep the tone steady. Open water can feel severe, but it also feels spacious and repetitive. Swell after swell. Wind across canvas, a ship rising and settling. Days marked by noon sight and changing light. If the mind stays with the ship rather than with exaggeration, the Mary Celeste becomes a study in drifting order. The deck still arranged. The cargo still stored. The hull still able to move. The sea carrying it onward as if commerce had turned, for a while, into silence. Commerce into silence. Movement without speech. A ship continuing after human routine has paused. There is a strange peace in that image. The later fame of the ship owes much to storytelling. Reports multiplied. Writers added atmosphere. Some details became sharper in the public imagination than in the surviving records. This happens often in maritime history. Sea stories travel well because the ocean leaves room for imagination. Yet a calmer account can move in the opposite direction. away from embellishment and back toward the scene as working sailors would have seen it. An unusual but not theatrical vessel requiring practical response. Working sailors see ropes before symbolism, cargo before legend, trim before metaphor. That perspective is deeply sleep-safe. Imagine the boarding party walking the deck, wind tugging lightly at clothing, timbers sounding under boots, hatches checked, a look into the hold, an awareness that this ship, though unattended, remains a machine of wood, sail, and balance, still interacting with the sea in understandable ways. Even the partial disorder later described belongs to ships as ships. Moisture, movement, shifted items, worn equipment. A sea passage marks everything it carries. Salt on surfaces, motion in every object, paper damp at the edges, barrels in the hold breathing with temperature and time. The Gibraltar inquiry that followed is another calming part of the story, because it places the event inside institutions. Admiralty procedure, sworn testimony, inspection and dispute over salvage and suspicion all slow the tale down into documentary form. Documents may not answer everything, but they reduce noise. They return the ship to a world of offices, signatures, legal language, and maritime habit. Office after ocean, statements after wind, ink after spray. Again the tone becomes quieter. For bedtime, one useful way to hold the story is through repeating contrasts. Busy ship, then quiet ship, ordinary voyage, then drifting vessel, open sea, then harbor paperwork. These contrasts allow the imagination to rest because they are rhythmic rather than sharp. The ship does not need to become a symbol of dread, it can simply remain a vessel whose later emptiness stood out against how ordinary the voyage had first been. Busy ship, quiet ship, open sea, harbor record. Again, busy ship, quiet ship, open sea, harbor record. And once more, canvas, barrels, logbook, slow Atlantic drift. The cargo itself contributes to the calm if treated plainly. Barrels of industrial alcohol are not a dramatic prop here. They are freight, commerce packed into containers and sent across water. Merchant ships have always carried the ordinary materials of distant industry and trade. That ordinariness matters. It reminds us that the Mary Celeste belonged to networks of work. Shipbuilders, merchants, port officials, chandlers, dock laborers, insurers, captains, and clerks all formed the world around such a vessel. A working world around one ship, many hands before the open sea, many signatures before the first sail was raised. The open water scene remains the deepest image though. A ship sighted from another ship. No immediate reply. Careful approach. Boarding in daylight. The unusual quiet of a deck where motion continues without the normal human pattern of command and response. Not chaos. Not ruin. Just quiet. Quiet enough that one can hear ropes strain, water along the hull, and the soft impact of fittings moving with the swell. Rope strain, water along wood, canvas shifting above, a quiet deck in afternoon light. That quiet deck is almost the whole bedtime story. The mind can walk it slowly, past the rail, past the hatch, past the wheel, into the cabin perhaps, where objects remain placed by former use. A chart table, a lamp, domestic traces. The presence of rooms reminds us that ships are tiny floating households as well as machines. They hold eating, sleeping, writing, storing, and waiting inside narrow walls. The Mary Celeste carried that enclosed human scale across a very large sea. Small rooms, large ocean, again, small rooms, large ocean. This scale contrast is one reason the ship lingers so easily in memory. A few cabins, a galley, a deck, around them the Atlantic. The vessel appears almost tender in such a setting, a human-made shape trying to preserve order while wind and water pass around it. Even when ordinary routine has ceased, the vessel moves, because many tiny acts of care keep it moving. Even when the later boarding party found quiet instead of that usual pattern, the ship still bore the marks of such care everywhere. It had not ceased to be a vessel shaped by repeated work in every board and rope, repeated work in every kept object, repeated work in the very balance of the ship. The Atlantic Passage also slows the imagination in a helpful way because ships never really go fast in the old sailing sense. They progress, they lean, recover, and progress. Noon becomes afternoon. Afternoon becomes evening. The log receives another entry. A lantern is trimmed below. Someone sleeps while someone else keeps watch. This is the time scale that best suits the Mary Celeste. Not abruptness but long measured movement over water. Progress, not haste. Swell, not shock. Measured movement over water. If one final scene is needed, let it be the ship after it has been sighted but before the boarding party steps across. Two vessels not far apart now, men observing from one deck to another. The open sea between them small enough to cross, large enough to keep each ship in its own silence. Sails move, hulls rise. The day remains broad and bright. The unanswered quiet on the Mary Celeste is real, yet the sea around both vessels remains spacious, almost ceremonially calm. Two ships, one broad sea. A pause before crossing. That pause is enough to carry the story to rest, not because it explains but because it widens everything. The vessel becomes part of the Atlantic again, one wooden form among routes, winds, and commercial passages. The boarding, the tow, the inquiry, and the later reputation all follow, but underneath them remains the simpler image of a ship in daylight, still afloat, still in order, still moving with the water, still afloat, still in order, still moving with the water. And so the Mary Celeste settles tonight into wood, sail and distance. A merchant vessel remembered because one quiet deck stood out against the ordinary busyness ships usually contain. A maritime record later enlarged by retelling, yet still calm enough, underneath it all, to drift onward through the mind like a ship under steady wind.